Welcome back to I Woke Up Like This. Today we're going to talk about one of the most asked questions that I get. How do we manifest aligned love into our lives? This is a topic that's really important because love doesn't cover just romantic relationships. It covers friendships, it covers family, it covers work relationships because love can span every area of your life. So before we manifest anything in, we have to understand what love actually is. And a lot of you, myself included, did not grow up with healthy examples of what love actually is. And that makes it a lot more difficult to recognize it out in the world, to really understand what it is in order to draw it to you. And if my energy seems a little low today, that's because it is. But in order to stay on schedule and get you an episode every single week, I am recording very tired from my new workout routine. It is making me a lot more sleepy and restful than I realized was going to happen. And this is a really big topic, and so I want to make sure that I do it justice. So this may be a situation where I record this episode and then we talk about other things in other episodes that I may not have touched on. Because in this episode, I want to make sure that we touch on the things that need to happen in order for you to manifest this vibration in your life, in order for you to draw it to you, in order for you to become a match to it. Because if you didn't have good examples of love growing up, whether that be parental, larger family units, your friends, romantic relationships, these kinds of things, if they're not emulated around you, they're hard to identify. So this is not your fault. This is also something that you came here to transmute and transform through. So when I see people that are waking up to who they really are, a lot of times this is a particular narrative that needs to be healed because we signed up for it before we got here, because it's one of the most powerful transmutations available to us. Because when you can turn guilt, shame, loneliness, anger, sadness into love, that creates a very powerful energetic effect in your life, but also in everyone's life around you. So if you've been struggling with this, this is something that you are meant to learn. This is something that you're meant to work through. And this is not something that you are stuck in for the rest of your life. So let's get you to the place where you are actually ready to receive love into your life. So first and foremost, we need to understand what love actually is, because most of the examples that we see are conditional and love is unconditional. It doesn't matter what you do, say, think, feel, any of the above, you are still loved because you are love. So that's really the first thing that you need to understand. You came from source. Source is an unlimited source of unconditional love, which you are a fractal of, which means you are unconditional love. Having to learn lessons and transmute through energies and deal with things like loneliness, sadness, guilt, shame, grief, all of the things, and move to a state of love does not mean that there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you were ever missing or lacking love. It means that you forgot to tap into what is already with you. So unconditional love doesn't judge. It doesn't demand change. It simply is. Whereas conditional love requires that you behave a certain way, that you react a certain way, that you put your needs below others, that you sacrifice yourself in order to gain the love. It's transactional. And you can do this with self-love too. So if you have self-love, but it's conditional, it will look like, I love myself when. I love myself if. And as somebody who's healed from eating disorders and dealt with body image issues, I used to have a lot of conditions when it came to loving myself. And we can talk about that in a different episode, because I'm sure there's plenty of you that would like to improve your self-worth, self-love, and your body image, and all of that is possible. So conditional love is transactional. That isn't real love, because love has no conditions. And in this world, we run into a lot of transactional conditional love, the version that we're sold, not what actually is. It's basically love fraud, because it's not actually love. And that's where religions step into a lot of trouble, where they put rules and regulations on your salvation, where you can only go to certain places and spaces if you behave a certain way. That's transactional. That's conditional. That is not source, because source created you to be uniquely you. And source has created literally everything, because it is trying to understand life, existence, consciousness, awareness, energy, all of those things in every state and formation that it possibly can. So it is not judging you. You are. This world is, but source is not. And when you realize that, that's when you really tap in to love. That's when you start to feel your connection to yourself and to everything around you. And feeling that connection is going to be the place to start, because that reconnects you with that stream of energy that's always been there. And when you reconnect with that energy, you emit that energy, that frequency, that vibration, because you understand it exists and you can actually feel it. A lot of the people that I work with that use the meditations that I provide really regularly have mystical experiences where they feel this unexplainable bliss. And that is the connection to source. That is the connection that they're feeling. It almost overwhelms the system when you feel it. And it only takes a fraction of a second of connecting to that energy, remembering how connected you are to it, that you realize a lot of the love that you've accepted in your life isn't love at all, because it's been transactional and conditional. I grew up with a mom who liked to use "I love you, but" very, very frequently. I love you, but I don't understand you. I love you, but you're nothing like me. I love you, but I don't understand why you aren't like everybody else. And the tone and demeanor of those comments were not complimentary. And so I grew up thinking love was conditional, thinking that I had to do something, be something, fit into some box in order to receive it. And I chased it for a very long time. And it wasn't until I learned to sit with myself and I started meditating and I started activating my pineal gland and I started going into the traumas and pains and past life experiences, this life's experiences, all of the things, that I realized that that was not love at all, that that was a setup so that I would transmute through that experience, that I would overcome it and access the energy that you also can connect to, the source, pure, unconditional love. And that's why it's so important to look at your beliefs and your behaviors around this particular energy. Because until I dove into what I believed and why I believed it, and saw the structure that was actually framing my interpretation of what love was, there was no way I was going to see what it actually is. And because conditions were put on me, I put conditions on myself. In order for me to love me, I needed to be X size. I needed to be X amount of pounds. I needed to fit into certain clothing and be a certain shape and have my hair a certain way, and all of these things that were completely unnecessary. And the bar continuously moved, because growing up, the person that I looked to that was supposed to love me unconditionally continuously moved the bar. It didn't matter what I did. It wasn't good enough. And at the end of the day, that's okay, because that person was never good enough for themselves either. And so they pushed that onto me. And it's my job to stop that. So that's what I did. So when we manifest aligned love into our life, we have to first look at our beliefs and our behaviors when it comes to love. Next, we need to develop a true sense of self-love. And this is where boundaries come in. Because when you love yourself, you have boundaries that protect yourself, not walls that keep everybody out, but legitimate boundaries that if people continue to hurt you and they don't respect how you want to be treated, then they lose access to you. This could be family, this could be friends, and this is absolutely romantic relationships. Because loving unconditionally and seeing people for where they are, what they're capable of, their capacity to actually love you, does not mean that you give them unconditional access to you. Because if you give them unconditional access to you, what you're saying to the universe is, this is what I will accept. And so this is another area where boundaries come in really, really beneficially, because these are the rules of engagement that you set with the universe. This is what you're telling the world that you will accept. So if you're letting things in because you're afraid if you hold a boundary, there won't be anybody there, you're not going to get to the place where you're really pulling in aligned, loving relationships, because you have to set and hold boundaries, because that is part of loving yourself. That is part of respecting yourself. And sometimes that does mean that you have to walk alone for a bit. But as it turns out, it's not as scary as you think it is right now. That's an opportunity for you to sit in your own energy and really figure out who you are. Really figure out what you want to draw to yourself. And this reminds me of a conversation that I just had with one of my clients, because this is a question that she has for me. And she brought it back to my attention that the first time that we spoke, she stated that she doesn't understand what she's doing wrong. She wants to bring a relationship into her life. And she talked about it for, 5-10 minutes. And then I asked her, okay, I hear you talking about you want a relationship, you want a relationship, you want a relationship. But I'm not hearing you ask for a great relationship, because she was having relationships. She was drawing relationships in, but they weren't the relationships that were in an aligned place. They weren't from an aligned love. They were from karmic interactions that teach lessons. Because when we ask to just draw in anything, we get anything back. And so if you have to hold boundaries with people in your life, that's a good thing. If you end up walking alone for a bit, that is an opportunity for you to really assess what you want. Because if you're people pleasing other people and you're settling for romantic relationships that aren't what you really want, you're usually too immersed into other people's energy to really understand what it is you want and need. You need to ask yourself, am I willing to settle for transactional love? Or am I willing to hold out until the thing that is meant for me crosses my path? And there will absolutely be a bridge of faith there. There will be moments where you ask yourself, is this good enough? Are my standards too high? And in those moments, that's when you need to sit with yourself. That's when you need to get quiet. That's when you need to meditate. That's when you need to develop your relationship with your higher self to the point where you can actually hear them say, yeah, you're settling. Or yeah, maybe you should explore this, just to go ahead and explore it, because you don't have enough information to actually make that judgment right now. And that's going to vary in different places and spaces in your life, different types of relationships. This isn't about perfect execution. This is about really learning how you feel in these moments with certain boundaries, and you really tap into your energy and understand what you need, because that's where the self-love is developed. And I would bet that in those moments that you actually get quiet, you sit in your own energy, you're going to start to review the past. You're going to start to really go, oh, that was definitely not aligned. I won't walk towards that again. And it's not because you made a mistake, but it's an opportunity for you to log that experience, recognize the energetic signature of it. And so if it crosses your path again, you let it walk on by. Love comes in a lot of different forms. And it's important to understand that sexual relationships are on top of love. They are not the actual conduit of it. You can have an unconditional love situation where you amplify it by those acts, but it is not the source of it. And that again is where we're sold a lot of lies in the matrix of beliefs that we have all inherited from past generations, because that is a supplement to, not the actual love. And men and women react differently to those kinds of relationships. Women produce more oxytocin, which basically makes them love drunk. And when you become biochemically love drunk, you miss a lot of the signs and synchronicities that are either leading you towards something or away from something, because your biology is overriding you. So the same way you have certain reactions to loud noises or different places and spaces and people, depending on how your nervous system is wired, you're going to have different reactions to people if you are in sexual relationships with them because of how your body responds. And all of those things are very personal choices. It is up to you to make those choices of what is in your alignment. Now, with that being said, celibacy can play a really important role in you figuring out who you actually are, what your energy is capable of, and what you want to attract in, because sexual energy is life force energy. So be smart about who you give it away to. Be smart about who you entangle it with. If you have intercourse with somebody that is really low vibrational, that has not done any of the work on themselves, that is still very base level on dealing with trauma, doesn't go to therapy, drinks a lot or does drugs, like the odds that you're going to absorb so much of that energy is really, really likely. And it happens without you being fully aware of it usually. And that's why people report that after these acts, they feel not like themselves. They have more anxiety. They're stressed more. They're upset, and they don't really have a reason to pinpoint why. And this is because you're inadvertently taking on somebody else's energy. And if you've already been working on yourself and you're elevating and you're awakening and you're healing and you're doing all of those things, you're naturally going to be the one to take that on and transmute that energy. And so what does that do? That slows you down getting into the timelines where you're actualizing your higher self, because you're basically like bogged down dealing with other people's things. And I am guilty as charged for doing that in the past. But that is also why I don't do that moving forward. I don't do that now. And I have been celibate for years because I naturally take on other people's things and transmute them for them. And so if you've had that similar experience, what I would say is stop bringing in fosters. Stop bringing them in to help heal them, train them, and release them back out into the wild, because that is just keeping you from going to where you're going. You need to understand that these are side quests, and they may not be very fun side quests. And the question I get so often is, what if I end up alone? And the reality is you may be alone for a while, but that also gives you the opportunity to really set the baseline for love in your life. That allows you to bring in aligned friendships, that really allows you to align your professional outlook and purpose with something that aligns with who you truly are. And you get that life force energy back. And the more you hold on to your life force energy, the more likely your actual counterpart, the person that is actually matching your energy of where you want to be as your higher self, will cross your path. But if you've taken on a lot of relationships that you knew weren't going to work out from the beginning, but you did them anyway because you thought you could fix them, or you thought you could fix yourself in order for the whole thing to work out, that's the wrong direction to go. Because if you're listening to this podcast, you're likely awake enough to know that the relationships you've had weren't going to work out at the very start, but you did it anyway. And sometimes it's okay to do things for the plot. That is up to you. There's no judgment here. Again, source isn't judging you either. There are so many different expressions of your life that you could manifest into this physical reality, and how you walk that path is up to you. The thing is if your goal is aligned love sitting as the highest expression of yourself, then you're going to have a lot of boundaries. You're going to have to hold a lot of standards, and you're going to have to walk this path alone for a bit. And that gives you the opportunity to develop so much self-love for yourself. Really connect into that source and understand that you are love. No one can ever take that away from you. And while it's nice to have another person amplify that back to you, you don't need that to feel it. And I think we're at a phase in the collective energy that a lot of people are figuring this out. They're figuring out more of who they are. They're waking up to their purpose and place in this world. They're starting to hold boundaries in a way that they hadn't before. And so collectively, we're all moving in this direction where there's going to be a lot more aligned love, but we have to go through this clunky process of wading through the mud and letting go of the old way of things before we transfer over into things just making a lot more sense. And if you're breaking generational cycles, the narrative around love and transmuting that energy is likely going to be front and center in your life. Aligned relationships are possible. They do exist. They may not look the way that you thought that they were going to. Because keep in mind, if you haven't had aligned relationships and love, you don't know what to look for fully. And that's why it's so important you tap into the feeling. You tap into the feeling of it. You go into meditation. You activate that energy inside of you because that's what draws those things to you. And things get delivered in a lot of funny ways. The person that birthed me may not be an aligned, loving relationship, but I have a stepmom that absolutely is, who sees me for who I actually am. Is she perfect? No, I'm not either. You don't have to be perfect, but it's the energy the relationship is approached from. And it's up to you to learn how to recognize that energetic difference in those things, because that exists in every relationship in your life. So if you want healthy, aligned, loving relationships, set that as your goal. Learn to access the energy of love inside of you so that you learn to recognize that vibration in somebody else. And stop manifesting any relationship. Manifest a great one, because that's what you deserve. That is what is meant for you. That is what is destined for you. Loving friends, loving family. They may or may not be blood. And on that note, we should actually talk about the quote, blood is thicker than water, because that has been truncated down to lose its actual meaning. That full quote is actually, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So we can interpret that as soul family is more important than biological family. Sometimes your soul family will be biological family in these bodies, and sometimes it won't be. There is an infinite number of combinations when it comes to who your soul family is. And the nuclear family is not always it. It could be step parents, it could be adoptive parents, it could be friends, it could be romantic relationships, it can be all kinds of things. But you will find those loving, aligned relationships if you align your energy with love and you set and hold boundaries and develop love for yourself. And on that note, I think that's all I've got today. So if you made it this far and you're on YouTube, stick a little heart emoji down in the comment section. If you are on the streaming channels, I know on Spotify, I just saw that you can make comments. So if you want to make a comment there, I would love that. And if you could rate me on those Spotify and Apple podcasts, I would love that. 5-star reviews are very helpful. Also hitting the download button. I will be back next week. And until then, remember, you've got this. Keep going.